Hello and welcome to the Reviews Brothers, where we are going through the entire GameCube library and picking out 3 games for every letter that are often overlooked. They won't always be the best games for the system, but ones that are interesting and a lot of people might want to check them out. Why only 3? Well, that's because the GameCube doesn't have quite the same library as some of the other consoles out there, but it certainly did have some of the best games around at the time. Anyway, we've got 9 games to look at, so how about I shut up, you press that subscribe button, and we take a look at some games. Let's start off spooky with Geist. This is a unique first-person shooter where you play as John Ramey, a scientist and member of counter-terrorism team. You're investigating an evil corporation and their evil doings, and while you're exploring their base along with your soldier buddies, you discover that they've found some crazy power source that involves ghosts, spectral energy and dimensional rifts. So, a regular day at the office then. Things happen and you're captured and stuck in one of their machines that pulls your spirit out of your body. But your ghost, or Geist, manages to escape, and you spend the rest of the game finding a way to get your body back, and of course kill all the evil bastards along the way. This is all done in first person, and the game is a mixture of shooting, exploring and puzzle solving. And one big aspect of the game is the fact that you're a ghost, meaning that you need to do a lot of possessing other people and objects along the way. It's actually a really cool idea that could do with a bit of a revival. Basically, as you're a ghost, you can fly around, and while you're flying around as a spirit, time moves incredibly slowly around you, but you move at normal speed. You can interact with a lot of the scenery as well as characters in the game, and can possess them as well. But to possess people, they will need to be scared. This is where a lot of the puzzle elements come in. You often need to figure out the correct sequence of events to freak people out. For example, there might be a ladder or something in the room with someone, so you can use your ghost skills to make the ladder fall over to spook them a bit, at which point they'll move to another area of the room where there might be something like a paint pot. You can use this to explode and freak them out and get paint all over the place. Then they might end up next to a mirror, and then you can do that classic horror trope of possessing the mirror to make it look like they're a zombie or something. At this point their aura turns red, and you can take control of them. What's cool is that you need to also possess a ton of different things throughout the game, and they each have their own abilities or uses, and you get a portion of enemy memories as well when you possess them, which can progress the story or give you hints as to what you might need to do next. There's soldiers with their various weapons that you'll need to possess in combat situations, there's engineers who have tools that you'll need to open doors or use various bits of machinery, scientists to use computers and that sort of thing. But what's cool is that you can even possess animals, so you get to be a dog, rats, bats and so on, and they each have their own abilities. Of course, birds and bats let you fly around, the dog is fast and lets you bark at things if you want to, and rats can fit into very small places. You'll also need to interact with the environment quite a lot to make things happen. You can do things like make boxes explode to kill enemies or blow holes in walls, and you can interact with things like lights, phones, and it's all good fun. It's kind of a cross between something like Space Station Silicon Valley on the N64, Poltergeist on the Mega Drive, and Half-Life. You will want to be in human form as often as possible though, as being in your ghost form basically means you have a timer, so you will need to possess people so your spirit doesn't disappear into the other realm. What's cool is that you'll need to try and act not suspicious as well, so if you are a soldier and you start pointing your weapon at your teammates, they'll get suspicious and eventually figure out that you're the ghost in disguise and kill you. There's also some enemies that can tell if you're a ghost. For example, the guard dogs, they can sniff you out. And you can die easily here. If the host dies, you will then have to just try and get a new body before you move on to the spectral plane. It's got some really cool sections like this, and it is very unique. And yes, it has a mildly famous part where you do have to take control of a sexy lady scientist who happens to be taking a shower at the time of you finding her. It's not perfect though, the controls here are probably the biggest issue. They are very slow and stiff. They do work well, but aiming can be a pain. Once you're used to it though, it is really good fun though, and great to see what you have to take control of next. The boss fights are also good, with a clever use of having to hop between characters and inanimate objects in order to find weak spots. It all looks decent enough, and about average for games at the time. The character models are okay, and the environments are all pretty much grey and brown. I do always have fun when I play this one though, and I don't know why many others haven't tried it. Here is Godzilla Destroy All Monsters Melee. It's a fighting game where you get to duke it out as some of your favourite Toho monsters. There's a story mode where an alien tells you that they've mind controlled all of the monsters, and they even try to put some comedy in there. So you choose your favourite one and you set out to stop their evil plans of world domination. What's nice here is that the game just doesn't take itself that seriously and just sets out to be as much fun as possible, and it definitely succeeds in that. All the monsters feel huge and have a decent amount of weight behind them. They don't have the biggest movesets, but they've got enough variety of punches, kicks, throws and projectiles to keep you going, and each of the monsters plays very differently, so it's fun to try them all and find out your favourite. Speaking of monsters, what is a bit of a shame is that there aren't too many. I mean, there are 11 to choose from, which I guess isn't bad, but 2 of them are just different versions of Godzilla, and you've got Ghidorah and Mechaghidorah, who are basically the same apart from a couple of moves. If you ask me, these could have been alternate skins, not separate characters. There's so many cool monsters that I would have loved to have seen here, like Ebera or King Caesar. Ah well. The fights all take place in cities across the world, and they have a different feel to them. Some of the cities have huge skyscrapers, where others are small port towns. It's great, and the whole game looks fantastic too. It's definitely a game that you'll need to play for an hour or so to get used to the feel of it, as attacks can feel slow and cumbersome, but that's kind of the point, and once you've played it for a bit and you're used to it, you'll have a blast. Picking up buildings and slamming them into your opponents is always fun. The game gets even better in multiplayer too. You can play with up to 4 players, and it's absolute chaos. In multiplayer you have a timer and you score points as you fight, and at the end of the match whoever has the most point wins. It gets really heated, and me and my friends used to spend hours playing this game. If you're after a great versus multiplayer game or love Godzilla, then you definitely need to own this one. Another fighting game now with the grim adventures of Billy and Mandy. This is based on a Cartoon Network show that I've never seen, but I'm sure it's great. It's a 3D arena fighter featuring what I assume are all of your favourite characters from the show, and I do have to say I quite like the characters here. You get a few game modes to play through, including a story mode where some mojo balls have been stolen, so you have to fight a bunch of different people in various locations to find out who stole them. This is all presented quite nicely with some great cutscenes. You also have single fights, a challenge mode, and of course multiplayer for up to 4 people. The gameplay here is simple, and it is quite a basic fighting game. You get a whopping 15 characters to choose from, most of which need to be unlocked by playing through the various game modes, which I always appreciate. Each character has a weak and strong attack as well as a throw move. These all work the same for every character, which is a bit of a shame, though there are differences in speed, power and reach, so that does make a difference. As you fight, you build up a special bar, which has 2 layers. The first, of course, does a decent special, but get it filled all the way and you do a much more powerful attack. These are often large combos or flashy blast attacks, that sort of thing. They're easy to pull off as well, and again, it's just the same button press for everyone. There's no special moves to learn here. Also, there's a ton of power-ups and weapons you can pick up in the levels as well. These are often essential for winning too, as they're really powerful, and some being way better than others. You get guns, swords, bombs, grenade things, flamethrowers and so on. It's all wacky and they're good fun to use. Fights see characters having a few lives and you'll need to deplete all of them in order to win a round. You can also find health in levels, so make sure you grab it before your opponents do. And the stages themselves are nice and varied, with some really fun ones to play on. And as you'd expect, they're packed with hazards and things that you can use to damage your opponents, so you've got to be careful of things like spikes, deep water, lava, radioactive waste, beehives and so on. It can be confusing at first, but doesn't take long to get used to. There's also things like gun turrets in the levels that you can jump in to use. That's a really cool touch. What I also like is that some of the levels are just standard arenas, whereas some are multi-level ones requiring some platforming, and some are even auto-scrolling stages that constantly move. It really keeps you on your toes. Once you've got your opponent down to his last life, then you'll need to finish them off with a special move. This is done by hitting them when they're stunned and have no health left. Then you essentially get a quick time event where you have to follow some button commands. If you get it right, you do a finishing move on them and you win the fight. What's cool is that if you mess up, they get a tiny bit of health back, so do have a chance of turning the fight around. I quite like that. You do get a few other game modes here as well. As well as the regular fights, you also have a King of the Hill mode where you've got to take control of flags in the levels, and you get points for holding them for a certain amount of time. There's also a coin mode where attacking your opponents makes them drop money. Whoever has collected the most coins at the end of the timer wins the round. It's a nice variety, and with up to 4 players could be really hectic. They can do any combination as well, so it could be all against all, 2v2 or even 3 versus 1, and I imagine it would be good fun with some friends if I had any. My only real gripe with the game is that the combat is super basic. There's little to no nuance to any of it, it's just the 3 attack buttons, and it does feel like your character also moves kinda slow. There is a dash move that helps with this, but if the characters moved just a little faster, I think it would have helped with the basic combat, as you wouldn't have really had the time to notice how basic it really is. But it is still a really fun game to play, and I didn't expect to enjoy it half as much as I did, that's for sure. So, give it a go, especially if you've got some mates that like stuff like this.
Mr. Delgado, meet my fist.
Let's get racy now with Hot Wheels World Race. And you know what? Hot Wheels games always seem to be pretty damn fun as far as I can tell. This is of course a racing game that's actually based off an animated TV series, which I can only assume no one really gives a crap about. Thankfully, the game it's based on is good fun. It's a racing game, and you get to choose from a bunch of different Hot Wheels cars, each of which has its own racer that you probably don't care about, as well as stats like speed, handling, boost and things like that which you probably do care about. And then you've got a bunch of tracks that you can race on. There are a few game modes here. You've got a few single player options of a single race or time trial, but you really want to go to the leagues, and I'm not sure why they make this option so far away in the menus. It's a bit of a mystery to me, as this is where you get most of the meat of the game. You already know what it is. You choose your racer from the 20 or so that you've unlocked, and then you take part in a bunch of races across tracks that get progressively more difficult. And you get points depending on where you place, and yep, you want to have the most points at the end. Doing well will unlock more tracks to race on and drivers to race as. And the courses here are really good fun, and often do get pretty tricky, and there's definitely a few that you'll want to race on a few times before you get used to them and win consistently. They are generally quite long and have plenty of twists and turns and even loops to drive around. It's great. There's also rings on the track that looks like they've been left behind by Sonic. Collecting these will increase your boost meter, and you can boost at any time when you have some. But also, one of the big mechanics are the stunts. There's a number of different ones you can do, and when you go off the many ramps in the game, you can flip forwards or backwards as well as left or right. Doing tricks is easy, but does take practice to be able to land them consistently. If you do manage to land, you'll get more boost power, as well as filling one of the 3 markers at the top centre of the screen. If you manage to pull off 3 perfect stunts and get all 3 markers, you will have a permanent speed boost until you next crash or fall off the track. This is tough to do though, as for the perfect stunt you'll need to do a flip, but also look at the top of the screen and press the button prompts that pop up. This makes it really tough to land, as you've got to look all over the screen, and you're usually not paying attention to your vehicle when it's upside down or not, but you will get used to it, and it is good fun. The courses are never meant to be realistic, and they take place in a variety of futuristic looking places, presumably across the world, and the variety is nice, with cyberpunk looking towns, mountain ranges, underwater tube tracks and so on. They do all look really nice, though there's never really anything else going on in them other than the race, which is a bit of a shame. The cars all look decent as well. Hot Wheels always have kind of crazy designs, and the ones here are no different, and it is fun to try them all out. There's also a challenge mode, which kind of also acts as a tutorial, forcing you to do various stunts and complete challenges like collecting things, boosting or drifting and that sort of thing. Some only last a few seconds, but later ones can even be a few laps. These are fun and a good way to learn how to play the game. They also unlock even more cars, so it is worth playing through them. The racing action is decent as well. It's fast and smooth with good controls. You will want to use the drift and handbrake here to get around some of the tighter corners, and it is one fun one to learn. I think it also looks great. The graphics here are excellent, with nice car models and nice looking courses like I mentioned earlier. It's another one that has multiplayer, which I imagine would be good fun. If you like racing games, then I would say give this one a try. Here is Hunter the Reckoning. This is one of those games that I used to play all the time with my mates in college. It's a top-down twin-stick shooter that, as far as I'm aware, is based on a tabletop RPG game thingy, kind of like D&D, but not. I'll probably get shot for saying that, but you know what I mean. In the game, you have 4 characters of different classes, and guess what? They each have their own attacks, weapons, and magic abilities to use. The story here is that an evil prison has been taken over by vampires, which is kind of annoying, and because of that, all sorts of demons, zombies and other monsters are pouring out into the streets, causing all sorts of problems. So you and your band of merry adventurers, or if you're like me and have no friends, just you on your own, head out to stop them. So the game puts you in a bunch of real-life locations like city streets, apartment blocks, the sewers, and eventually the prison itself as you set out to dish out the undead justice. The gameplay here is pretty simple. You move with the left analog stick and aim with the right one. The R button will attack with whatever weapon you've got equipped. Personally, I would have preferred it if you didn't need to press a button to attack, but it doesn't really matter. For the most part it works well enough, but the aiming can, and often does, feel quite jerky, which is kind of surprising. It's definitely not as smooth as it should be. But still, it works, and the game has a fairly generous auto-aim that does help with this. You get objectives in the levels. These are basically to kill everything you see, or to find a certain number of things within the level, whether that be survivors that you need to rescue, skeletons you need to have their bones exhumed, or maybe just buttons that you need to press to open doors. Essentially, every level sees you exploring it till you found the required stuff, at which point the exit marker becomes active and you can move on. Oh, and there are a few escort and protection missions here as well. It's simple, but fun. Every level has hundreds of enemies in it though, and that's the main meat here. Every character has a basic melee weapon and a ranged weapon. These both have unlimited ammo. Depending on the character, your melee weapon might be more powerful than your ranged ones, and vice versa. Interestingly though, there are some enemies that are immune to certain weapon types, meaning that even if your melee weapon is crap, you're forced to use it at times, and I kinda like that. There's also plenty of other weapons you can collect in the levels as well. You get shotguns, machine guns, rocket launchers, flamethrowers and so on. More powerful versions of the weapons are available as you progress as well. And the combat here can be tough and frantic. Enemies can take a few hits to kill, and there's rarely less than 5 or so at any given time. And a lot of the time there'll be a mixture of enemies that have projectiles, melee attacks and even suicidal spider things that explode and do massive damage. You really do have to be careful. And the bosses here are massive as well. They are fun to fight though, but can often drag on with their massive life bars. I'm fairly sure that they haven't really scaled the difficulty here, so if you're playing in single player, it looks like you get the same number of enemies and they have the same amount of health as they would if you're playing in 4-player co-op, which by the way is loads of fun if you have 3 mates to play this with like I did back in the day. You also have magic, which is different for each character. Some have healing magic, some have attacking magic, some have buffs for you and your other players, and can make them faster or stronger and so on. This is another reason to play in multiplayer if you can, as often a decent combination of spells can really help with the hordes of enemies and bosses. Graphically, the game is alright. It's nothing really special. It is quite zoomed out though, but you can still tell that the textures and stuff isn't all that great. But this does mean that you have a constantly decent frame rate most of the time, which in a game like this is much more important. This is a game that is fun, mindless action in single player, but definitely way more fun with a few mates, in case I hadn't mentioned that already. Worth a look, especially around the spooky season. And if you really want scary, then check out Hello Kitty Roller Rescue. No, really. This is an action platform game based on the super popular anime Cat, and it is actually surprisingly fun. Hello, which I assume is the name of the kitty, has to stop a bunch of invading shapes that have appeared in her town and are taking over the streets and, more importantly, the fun park. We can't have that. They've also kidnapped a bunch of your friends and family. So she puts on her skates, grabs her magic wand and goes on a murderous rampage to stop them and send them back to hell. This is where, if I wasn't so lazy with my editing, I'd put a montage of the game with the Doom Eternal soundtrack in the background, but you'll just have to imagine that for yourselves. You need to go through a bunch of levels fighting red cylinders, blue cubes and other such terrifying enemies. To do this, you just have to whack them a few times with your wand. They don't put up much of a fight, and this is clearly a game aimed at a younger audience. You do have 2 attack buttons, but I found that I could make it through every level just by pressing B. As well as killing everyone mercilessly, you also need to be on the lookout for keys to open doors, as well as for your friends who are either locked up in cages or hiding somewhere out of sight. What's cool is that rescuing characters often means that you can select them to join you in future missions. They will be controlled by the computer and will follow you around and help you defeat enemies. There's even items in levels which you can find that make them level up to become stronger and better at helping you. And between levels you can even choose which character you want to come with you in the levels, or if you want, you can go solo. There are sometimes simple puzzles to solve, but these basically just are a case of finding switches or buttons that will open new paths to new areas of the levels. You also find coins in the stages, and these can be used to buy health and extend your health bar. You do have boss fights here as well, and these are actually pretty damn fun. You will need to do something different for each boss, and each have their own weaknesses and ways of killing them that you'll need to figure out. Or actually not really figure out, as the game basically tells you exactly what you need to do every time. Controlling Hello is easy, though she does have a strange momentum thanks to being on roller skates. It actually makes it a bit more annoying to control than if you were just running around normally, but it's not exactly hard to get used to. It is also a little slow and a bit more speed would have helped. Completing levels unlocks new costumes to wear if you're into that sort of thing, and even different weapons, though they do all play the same, it's just basically a new skin. But graphics wise, the game is actually pretty damn good. It's super bright and colourful, and all the characters look and animate well, with new enemies being introduced all the time. And the cutscenes between levels are really well done, with some excellent graphics. It won't take long to finish though, and you can easily beat the game in less than 2 hours. But again, this is a game that's clearly made for kids, and I can really see them having fun with it. Hell, even I had some fun with it. It's one of those games that I can imagine a lot of people really not liking or saying is awful, but it won't be because it's actually a bad game, it's just because it wasn't made for that person, if you know what I mean. So yeah, if you've got a younger sibling or you love cute Hello Kitty things, then I think you'll get a kick out of this. And if you like simple cartoon action things, then maybe you'll like The Incredibles: Rise of the Underminer. This is the video game follow-up to the popular Pixar movie. If you remember, at the end of that first film, a bloke appears calling himself the Underminer, and along with his robot army, intends on taking over the world. Well, that's where the game kicks off, which, whether it's deliberate or not, is actually a really good way to tie in video games to the movies. In this game though, rather than taking control of the family of 4, for some reason it's just Mr. Incredible and Frozone, which is fine because they are cool characters. But you know full well if the PlayStation 2 had native support for 4 players, all the games like this would have always been 4 players instead of just 2. Anyway, in this 1 or 2 player game, you play as the people I just said, and you have to fight the Underminer's robot army and eventually find him and his underground lair and then punch him in the face. It's a very simple run and punch, but it is quite addictive. If you're playing single player, you can switch between the 2 characters at any point with the press of a button, and you'll need to do this at times as they have their own abilities. Mr. Incredible is super strong, so can pick things up and destroy things that Frozone can't. And likewise, Frozone can freeze things, including almost every enemy, as well as creating ice paths and bridges that you'll need to use to get over certain chasms, so you'll switch between them regularly to do all of this. There's also a load of enemies in the levels, and almost always you're almost always in some kind of combat. This is easy, and you can just hammer the B button to punch enemies to death. You can also use the freezing and throwing abilities of the characters, and some enemies will require you to do this, and I was actually surprised at how many enemies I had to fight. There's times where you can freeze the projectiles of some enemies to throw back at other ones. It's actually pretty fun. Killing enemies earns you XP, and each of the characters levels up as you play, letting you give them more health, stronger attacks, and even unlocking a few super moves, which is a nice touch. The super moves are basically screen clearing ones that get rid of most of the enemies. They're fun to use. There is a bit of platforming here as well, and some of it can be tricky, requiring precise jumping, even needing to hit switches and time things really well if you want to survive. It all looks alright as well. The designs are decent thanks to it being based on a Pixar property, and I do think they've done a decent job of recreating the characters. It's just a shame that pretty much all of the environments are grey and brown, though they do try to mix it up with some ice levels and things like that. It's not a particularly tough or long game, which is probably a good thing to be honest, as it could get boring if it dragged on. You can beat it in about 3 hours, but it would be fun with a friend or maybe a younger kid. The cutscenes here are pretty decent, and the voice actors are fine, doing mediocre to bad impressions of the actual cast. I will say that they do talk far too much during gameplay though, and that's something that I can't wait to stop in games, especially when characters are usually just more annoying than funny. I don't get it. But yeah, this is a simple, mindless, fun game that will kill a few hours. Ikaruga is one of the few shooters on the GameCube and possibly the only bullet hell shooter for the system. I might be wrong on that, I guess I'll know by the end of this series. So yeah, it's a bullet hell game from Treasure. It doesn't really bother with a story, so you can make your own one up if you care about that sort of thing. All you really need to know is that there's a bunch of enemies that come in both black and white varieties, and you need to stop them. Being a Treasure game, there is a gimmick, and the one here is that you yourself have a ship that can change between being black and white, and that is very important. Enemies will fire out a ton of shots at you at all times. These bullets are the same colour as the enemy that shoots them. Basically, you can absorb the bullets that are the same colour as your ship at that time. So if there are black bullets, you want to make sure that you're switching to the black form, and white for white. This means you're constantly switching colours so you don't take damage. It doesn't matter how big or powerful the shot is, as long as it's the same colour as your ship when it touches you, you won't feel a thing. Absorbing these shots also builds up your special bar, which lets you fire out a load of energy missiles that home in on enemies. But also, enemies are weak to the opposite colour, so if you shoot a white enemy when you're black, it'll be destroyed much faster than if you shoot a black enemy with a black bullet. And why do I feel like I have to be really careful when I'm describing this game? Can you use green and orange for the colours next time, please, Treasure? This can be important, as if you ram into enemies you will blow up, and sometimes there's just too many to defeat by using the same colour shot as enemy, if you know what I mean. It makes things really tricky. And this game is really damn hard. You need lightning fast reflexes to get through it, which I definitely don't have, but it's always fun for me to try. You've got a few game modes, all of which play the same, but you get challenge modes and practice modes, so you can get used to it if you're someone that likes to get into these things. The levels themselves also get kind of complex, with crazy things popping up all over the place for you to avoid, and a lot of the scenery is not destructible, so you've got to do some really precise flying. There's also some really massive boss fights, as you normally expect in a game like this. These are always fun to fight, and timing your colour changes is really tricky in these fights. It is tough, but I don't think it's ever unfair, you just need to practice. Graphics wise, it looks good, it's all polygons and it plays super smooth. I will say that I've never really been a big fan of the designs in games like this. I find the big robot ship stuff kind of boring, and I just think all the enemies in games like this all look the same, but it's fine. I do really like the music here though, it's pretty epic. Bullet hell games tend to have a certain audience, and I think by now this is one that you probably do know of if you like the genre. But if you haven't tried it and it looks fun, then definitely give it a go. And finally for today, one that probably a lot of you have been waiting for. It's the Incredible Hulk Ultimate Destruction. This is a really great action game where you take control of everyone's favourite anger management poster boy, the Hulk. Never that puny banner, he can do one. It's your standard Hulk tale. He's slightly miffed about the fact that he wants to just do some experiments so he can stop being so damn irritable, but the army, as well as a bunch of other heroes, aliens and all sorts, want to capture or defeat you and try to figure out why you're so mad. He probably just needs a Snickers. So the game sees you taking on various missions to try and get the things you need to build the various bits of equipment you need to do your sciencing. This involves exploring some pretty large sandbox cities where you're often rewarded for causing as much destruction as possible. And really, although you do need to complete missions which involve finding things, smashing buildings, protecting stuff and so on, the game does a great job of letting you just run around doing what you want and, more importantly, having fun. The world is large and fairly open. There are different areas of the city as well as badlands and places like that you can visit, and the Hulk has access to a whole bunch of moves and abilities that really make getting around a whole lot of fun. Firstly, you can run pretty damn fast, and even just flat out run up the side of buildings, making it easy to get to the top of them in seconds. You can also jump really far, and can charge your jumps to literally bound over buildings. Of course, doing all this will attract enemies. These start off being the local police, who of course don't ever stand a chance. So then the army will come in, complete with tanks and choppers. Later in the game you also have to contend with skyscraper-sized mechs, as well as some Hulk villains like Abomination and Devil Hulk, who I'm really not familiar with. And the combat is what most people, including me, really like about the game. They've done such a good job of making you feel like the Hulk. You have basic punch and kick combos that you can do, but you can also pick up a hell of a lot of the scenery to use as projectiles or weapons. You can slam cars into people's faces or smash people in the face with a light pole just acting like it's a baseball bat, or of course you can do the classic where you pick up a car, rip it in half and then use it as boxing gloves. You can also unlock more silly moves that are actually devastating, like the awesome elbow drop that lets you jump off of skyscrapers and elbow drop onto a tank, completely demolishing them. And some of the stuff is just so cool, like learning to catch missiles that enemies shoot at you, at which point you can just carry them around for a while and then throw them back at whoever's trying to kill you. And it's also easy to do with great controls that are intuitive. You can honestly spend hours outside the missions just running around and causing mayhem, or ultimate destruction I suppose. You can be killed though, so watch out. Hulk will take a hell of a beating before snuffing it, but the game is actually quite difficult while you're getting used to your abilities and the controls and learning the best way to take out certain enemies, and there really are better ways to deal with certain enemies than others. The bosses in particular are really tough. I actually don't like the fights with Abomination very much, as I never really felt like my moves were doing anything, and for me it just became a case of running away and throwing things from a distance. Anytime I got up close to him he just seemed to annihilate me. But it's okay, I'm a pro gamer and I won eventually. You'll earn XP from killing enemies and completing side missions and minigames, which is where you get your new moves. And the minigames here are often really fun, and they don't take themselves seriously at all. You've got things like having to glide as far as possible using a giant inflatable gorilla, or there's one where you have to drop kick a car as far as you can, and even one that's basically golf but using one of those massive globe things that you'd see outside a shop or on top of the Daily Planet or something like that. It's great. There's also loads of stuff to find in the game, letting you unlock various comic books, as well as different costumes and skins for the Hulk, so there's lots of reason to keep coming back to the game. The graphics are decent, the draw distance here is particularly impressive for the system, and there's rarely any slowdown, even with the crazy amount of action that's going on with half a dozen tanks and choppers blowing you up with rockets. Meanwhile there's a building falling down in the background, but you can still suplex a mech at the same time with a decent frame rate. It's great. This is a perfect example of how superhero games should be made, and it's still crazy fun to play today. It's definitely a tough game, but one that you will want to keep playing, that's for sure. So there you go, a bunch of games on the GameCube that you might not have played. Which one is your favourite? As always, let me know in the comments below. I want to thank my patron for his continued support, and if you want to join my Patreon where you can get even more content including reviews too hot for YouTube, podcasts, gaming challenges and more, then click the link in the description below. On screen now you can see where else you can follow me, so why not do so? I've got plenty of great content for everyone to enjoy. And now, all that's left for me to say is thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time.